We have SF Chief of Police over here, Bill Scott, with us today on this Zoom to talk about some things. Or would you prefer William? Or should I just say Chief Scott?
Either, whatever you want to call me. Bill, William, that Chief, it doesn't matter.
Obviously, we asked you to join us today, as I'm sure you've been having these kind of discussions for the last, month or so, surrounding what's going on with the reform that people are kind of protesting about and asking for with the police department. And I know San Francisco PD is pretty good. You know, I was reading when we were talking about tear gas and stuff today that hasn't been a situation over there for you on that side of the bridge, although Oakland has dealt with some stuff. But, you know, the situation with George Floyd and different violent arrests that we've seen that have led to unfortunate loss of life and whatnot is a huge thing. And obviously you've seen thousands of people protesting all over the streets in the Bay Area. And so I guess we just wanted to get some insight, like, you know, people are protesting and they're calling for change, but until it's voiced and people know that it's actually working and things are happening, then I feel like, you know, what they're out there doing isn't being answered. So that's why we want to put more stuff out here like this, just to let people know. And I know London just announced a plan for reform too. Right. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, let me start with the issue at hand that started this movement across the world, and that's really the tragic and horrific death of Mr. George Floyd. And here's our reality. I mean, we know that there's been throughout the history of policing in this country, just a history of disparities and injustices against Black people, and particularly Black men. You know, I've been a part of this profession for almost 31 years, and you know, I'm still glad and proud to be a member of policing and to try to make a difference for the better. But the issue is we've had these issues for many, many, many years. And to see it play out on camera and in front of our eyes, I think it struck a chord in people that unlike anything that we've ever seen before. So I think it's going to lead to some real change. Now, there's a lot of people saying a lot of things right now about what needs to be changed. And it has to be thoughtful. It has to be thought out, and it has to be with good conscience, because let's not forget our past on that issue either. You know, the will of the people is always not the right will. The will of the people back in the day was the same will of the people that oppressed African-American people. So this change has to come with good conscience. It has to come with thought and balance. And I think what you're seeing right now in this really worldwide voice to say policing in this country has to change. We've already seen many departments who have been hesitant, this is an example, to ban the chokehold, the carotid, that now overnight, well, not overnight, it's been a couple of weeks now, have banned it. And, you know, I'm happy and proud that this department, and I see Dr. Marshall's on the call because he helped lead this charge, it was banned in 2016 in this department. And it didn't come without its own controversy. There was a lot of people, you know, within the department that thought that was the wrong thing to do, but it was the right thing to do. And now everybody else is following suit. So this is a catalyst. And it's tragic, and there's no other words to describe what happened, but I think it is a catalyst for change. And I just, you know, pray that the change comes with good conscience and thought.
We noticed, and we talked about this morning, Chief, that you know, there are changes that have been announced in regards to like sending out people to mediate issues in the city of San Francisco now, sending out mental health folks, sending out medics and things like that, rather than having police intervene in certain situations that could, because of, you know, just, you know, the heat of the moment or whatever else, turn into something that they don't need to be. How do you feel about these changes, and how are you like explaining kind of to officers that these are going to be less things that are going to be on their plate? Because we know that, like, you know, like I've been hearing a lot about this Cahoots program that's up in Oregon, and taking pieces of that and then integrating it into what's happening with San Francisco and the overall department, and how, you know, you guys deal with kind of minor issues.
I think it's a step in the right direction. And look, these discussions have been happening in this city for at least during my time here. And I've been here now for 3.5 years. Again, I say, you know, this tragic incident is a catalyst for positive change. I think it's a positive move. We police officers get sent to calls that are sometimes really not calls that are suited for policing. I mean, some of the things that we have to deal with, and we have to because we get the calls when people
Right.
dial 911 or 311, somebody has to respond.
Right.
But if it's purely a mental health issue and there's no criminal activity and nobody's safety or life is in jeopardy, I would much rather see a mental health professional deal with that situation. If it's purely a homeless issue, and homelessness is not a crime, with no other criminal activity, there's no obstruction of the sidewalks or the roadway. If it's in that situation creates hazardous conditions due to public health issues,
Right.
I would much rather see public health deal with that issue. And the street outreach teams that we have in this homeless outreach teams that we have in our city already deal with that issue. I think it's a step in the right direction, and I think it's a matter of putting the right resources at the right problems. And I don't think anybody can argue that that's a step in the right direction. Certainly not me. So I applaud it. I'm glad that the mayor now has made this a priority. And again, we already had a framework to work toward that direction. This has been the catalyst and now has pushed this to the forefront.
Chief, how do you feel with the recent calls that we've been hearing from a lot of protesters and also organizations saying to defund the police, right? And like you did just mention, Mayor Breeze said that she's going to be allocating money from the fund that generally goes into policing for San Francisco into different options for the community, into rebuilding in certain areas as well.
Yeah.
How do you feel like that'll be able to impact the actual community moving forward?
Yeah. So first, let me define defunding the police, because I've seen some headlines where
Right.
Chief Scott supports defunding the police.
Right.
So I'm all for reallocating resources to help the African American community, because our community is a community that needs help in a lot of areas.
Yeah.
And if the police department has to be a part of sacrificing, or not even sacrificing, reallocating a portion of our budget to make things happen, ultimately it's going to help everybody, including the police department, because a lot of the root causes that we're talking about, the mental illness, the mental health issues, educational disparities,
right.
healthcare, all these things that need to be improved to improve the condition and the health of the African American community. When we have healthy communities and resilient communities, the reality is there's less need for policing in healthy communities. So I'm all for that. And defunding is a very broad term. I'm not for at all abolishing police departments and defunding our entire budget. We have to have police services. There are over 300,000 people in this city last year, well over 300,000, who called 911 and expected us to be there.
Right.
We just had a rash of shootings in African American communities where up to 80 shots were fired with assault rifles. And
right.
when people in that community call us, we got to come and we got to be there. So the notion that we don't need police is just really a bad notion. And a lot of the people who are leading this cause aren't the people from the communities who want us to come when they call us and are impacted by violence more than anybody else. I'm not for that. But what I am for is just what the mayor is doing, reallocating some of the police department's budget to help the African American community, which I think is a wonderful thing, and I'm all for that.
I think it just boils down to verbiage, right? Because if you just say defund the police, they think that they're going to send y'all home and that crime can just run rampant or something, or that we don't need you, which, it's just, it's all about verbiage. But I do want to just get your opinion, because you weren't always the chief, right? You were out there patrolling the streets and whatnot. If we could rewind time from the footage that you saw of the George Floyd incident, how would you have reacted? Because, some of the reform that I've seen in different states has called for other police officers to intervene if they've seen violent activity or force done by another officer. How could that have been handled better?
Well, I will start, and I think I understand the point of your question, with the fact that with our police department, and again, I got to give kudos to our police commission when Dr. Marshall was on it, we have in our policy a duty to intervene. Now, it goes beyond that for me. uh, like I said, I've been in this business for going on 31 years.
Mm-hmm.
That's really a character issue. I think we have a moral responsibility to intervene. Like almost my entire career has been in operations, work in the field, working in homicide, work field sergeant, lieutenant, captain in a station. Almost my entire policing career has been in operations, and in all of my career, it's about doing what's right. You know, we have policies to enforce to make sure that if we don't do what's right, then we're held accountable. But that really is a humanity issue. When you stand by and see another human being being done wrong, and in this case, being killed, you have a moral responsibility, whether you wear a uniform or not, to take action and try to intervene. When you put on this uniform, that is multiplied. So if I could rewind this, and I can tell you just from my personal experiences, that's always been who I was. You know, there were times where I had to grab a partner by the collar and say, you know, I got this one, you know, you cool off. And any good partner will do that. You don't let your partner go down that path. You know, we work in very volatile situations, and we have, you know, sometimes very little time to make decisions. But when your partners at the basic level in patrol, and this is something that a wise police officer told me, and who was actually a family member who cared about me, is you have that talk in that car about what you're about. When you're working with somebody new that you've never worked with before, you lay out what you will do and what you won't do. I'm not going to lie for you. I'm not going to brutalize anybody. And you have to have that talk with your partner so they know what you're about. A lot of times that in and of itself will prevent a lot of foolishness.
Establish an understanding, yeah.
Exactly. And a lot of my partners have done that. I do that. I used to do it every time I worked with somebody. They knew what I was about. And there were many other officers that did that as well. But as we see, some officers don't have that talk, and we have the problems that we have.
Right. We've talked about, you know, we joke about how our boss kind of monitors our social media to make sure that we don't misrepresent, you know, the radio station or whatever the case may be. And from what I understand, this Derek person had obvious signs of where he stood as far as, you know, racial bias and whatever the case may be. So with that, do you think that possibly doing a deeper search on people involving social media now, because it's such a huge part of our lives moving forward, that background checks should include seeing what people say socially online? And, you know, with that, you're going to have to train the 911 dispatchers too, to make sure that, you know, they dispatch the appropriate people.
Yeah, I do. And that, you know, that actually does happen. And at least with our background processes in San Francisco, we've had cases where we've had things to come up online, and it's caused people not only to not be hired, but in a couple of cases, it was found out after they were hired, and people were released. So that has to happen. Look, what happens on social media is relevant to the job. If one of our members, you know, first of all, let me back up a little bit. We have a First Amendment. There's a right to free speech. But if your speech undermines the credibility of this organization, you can say what you want to, but then there's consequences. So that's what we ask all of our members, all of our officers to understand. You say what you want to online or wherever when you're outside of this job, but you have to understand that there is a connection. And if it undermines the credibility or undermines the trust of the public in this organization, then there has to be consequences to that. And to your point, yeah, I think that should be, and it is, at least with the San Francisco Police Department, a part of what we look at when we hire somebody.
Chief, you do understand, though, to a degree, there's a large piece of the public who feels like part of their justified anger right now is because of the accountability that doesn't occur at times when it comes to, you know, what happens in interactions between police and the public. We're still in a time where, you know, the folks who went into Breonna Taylor's home, you know, haven't been held accountable, which is, you know, part of why people are out in the streets right now. So, you know, are those, like, obviously, you know, in the Bay Area, we have a different way of doing things. And obviously San Francisco, in your case, as you've explained, there's a different way of doing things in terms of background checks and accountability and things like that. But overall, would you say that you understand kind of historically and presently, obviously, what that frustration is that people have?
I absolutely do. And that question is really, particularly now with the speed of information, is really important that we kind of go back to what this country is supposed to be, a country of due process, a country of fairness. Now, is this the ideal society? No, we know there's issues. There's always been issues. But I want to point out a couple things. You know, every organization, including yours, has its processes. And part of what has to happen, whatever those processes are, there needs to be a fair process in terms of when people are held accountable. It has to be a fair process. And I want to going back to 1992 with the riots. You know, that video of the beating of Rodney King was 1991. Everybody waited patiently while the due process played out, and everybody got a chance to see really every portion of that trial. LA and this country didn't erupt into flames until that verdict was read, and people had an opportunity to make up their own mind about the facts. And why I say that is really important. You mentioned the Louisville case, and look, I don't know how that's going to turn out, but what I do know is there has to be a process. I mean, if that chief of police or that police commission, if they have one, has the ability to hold somebody accountable in a week, then that's what the public should expect. You know, with our commission, we have a process, and that process sometimes it takes a little while before the facts get before the commission. There has to be an investigation, and then, you know, people can make up their minds of whether this was just or not. In this state, fortunately, right now, we have transparency laws that have been enacted in the last year. 2019, January was when these transparency laws. So things that about these type of issues, particularly use of force, the public now can see for themselves everything. The investigation, what went up to the decision, how the decisions were made, the decision that was made, and the public didn't have that type of transparency. So my only caveat to this is, you know, we can't be the society that makes a decision based on 1/10 of the evidence that whoever ends up adjudicating that case, whether it be a courtroom or a police commissioner or a police chief, has to look at all the evidence. And sometimes particularly with social media, we see a video clip and everybody wants to hang a head in the town square. And that's not the society that we are, nor is it the society that we should be. There's a process. And when everybody gets to see, and that process is transparent, people should do whatever they feel is the right thing to do in terms of their protests, in terms of holding people accountable. And when that accountability doesn't happen, then, you know, there's options there too. You know, replace the commission, fire the chief. You know, that's what accountability looks like in my view. But we're in this world right now where, you know, a news clip and a news story sometimes becomes the case, and it really shouldn't be that way. And I don't think any of us, if we were on the other end of that, because let me say this, you know, Black people have been on the other end of that, where people have been railroaded into prison terms on less than at the evidence to do so. So I don't think any of us want to be in that position. I think what we should all, at least what I will speak for myself, shoot for is that idealism of a fair trial, due process, and then accountability once those things have occurred.
You know, Chief, I'm glad you said that, because I was about to cut to the chase. Being a Black man, you know, in policing, I'm just curious how it is you deal with that dynamic, right? Being a part of the Black community and seeing this, you know, this frustration, this civil unrest because of what is happening, and also being an officer, right? And being a part of policing in this country. Number one, how do you deal with that dynamic? And do you think, what do you think we can actually do to change it from, you know, being on the inside, looking out? How do you think we can, you know, move these steps forward so that, you know, we can try to create some type of understanding and just a better world for us all?
Well, I think number one, I'm a Black man. I always have been and always will be.
Right.
So that brings a perspective to the table
Right.
that I hope will be a positive thing. I mean, let's go back in our history again. Back in, let's say, I think the 60s were the last time we saw really just protesters swept the country like we're seeing now.
Right.
We didn't have an African American perspective at the table making those decisions then. Even in the early 90s, there were very few African American police chiefs at that time. Now that narrative has changed, so we have an opportunity to bring the perspective of being Black in this country to the table. I perfectly understand the anger and frustration. I know what it feels like to be always the suspect,
Right.
and whether I put on this uniform or not, when I take it off, I'm still a Black man. And when I go in the store, this has happened recently where, the eyes are on me by the security guards, watching me. And so I know what that feels like. I mean, let's be real here. But I think it's a positive thing that I am at the table. Sometimes that brings its own set of pressures. I got to be fair with you and honest with you.
Right.
It brings its own set of pressures because
Yeah.
these changes take time. These changes aren't going to happen overnight. They never have. But the fact that we do have diversity, and it's not just Black, but it's good to have a Black perspective at the table right now.
Right now.
Because change is coming. And I'm glad that I get a chance to be a part of it with my perspective, because I think that's really important. Fundamentally, I've always, known who I am. And in terms of policing, yeah, there's been times where you see things that we know the disparities exist. Let me just put it that way.
Yeah.
More Blacks get stopped. I'm talking about in this city and other cities. More Blacks get arrested. More Blacks are in the criminal justice system. I just went up to San Quentin prison a couple of months ago, and we sat down, me and a bunch of other San Francisco police officers sat down for hours and just had really heart-to-heart conversations with a lot of men who were in prison for life. And it's sobering, to see the disparities and to look at the prison yard and see, that's when you really see.
Right.
The majority of the people that I saw were either, Black or brown.
Black or Latino, yeah.
And that's when it really hits you in terms of, you already know these things, but when you see it,
Right. You see it.
It strikes another chord. And it just sitting down talking to those men, I think it was very helpful for me, and I think it was helpful for them, because it was just not me. It was a cross-section of officers, many of them white, who got to hear from people, the consequences of our work. Not, we do what we're supposed to do, but even when we do everything right, there's consequences. And the consequences play out with these disparities that we see. And then this, the conversation right now across the country is systemic racism. How are we going to address it? We really got to peel back all of our policies and look at, how our policies create that dynamic that I just saw.
Right.
And that everybody sees. And so it's a deep conversation, but I think change is coming, and I'm happy to be a part of it, to answer your question.
Chief, a lot of what I've advocated for, a lot of what I've been advocating for years is for a lot of us to get up and get out and let our voices be heard at the polls. And folks headed to city council meetings and doing things like that. Like you mentioned something earlier about, hey, if you got officers who are bad, we can get them out of here. If we got chiefs or we got people who are in our mayor's office who are bad, we can get them out of here. And I think part of what changes systemic racism is not only addressing it, but or addressing it with our voices and marching in the street, but also addressing it at the polls. Because if people are allowing policy, right, like part of, like, yeah, police have to enforce policy, but that policy comes from somewhere else too, right? So it's holding those folks as accountable, with you going and filling out that ballot, right? As it is with trying to hold the police accountable for what they have to do to enforce said policy. Yeah,
I agree. I couldn't agree more.
I did want to just mention this really quick, and I'm sure you probably aren't a person that likes to talk about other people too much, but recently in the news, the Berkeley police chief I guess, had a slip of the tongue when he was on a Zoom conference with the city council. And I know that you guys are tired. You guys have been out there, protecting the community and the protesters at the same time. And, you're humans at the end of the day. So your emotions come out regardless. I mean, either whether you're in the middle of an arrest or just having a conversation about policies being changed or whatever. He blurted out the words, well, if we can't use tear gas, then I guess we have firearms, we'll just shoot them. And I don't see you being the type of police chief that would ever have that mistake happen, especially on a city council meeting. But, we try to remind people that police officers and chiefs and captains are all people too. That just doesn't seem like maybe that's a position that he should keep saying those words.
Yeah, well, that's the first I've heard that. I didn't see that. I mean, I can't excuse it. I don't know why that would be said. All I can say is, for me, it's a lot of this job is about what's in your heart, and what's in your heart tends to come out under stress, and that's why it's so important to hire the right people as much as you can determine what's in people's hearts.
Right.
But who you are tends to come out under stress. So, I mean, I can just speak for me. That's not in my heart. We have a job to do. Our job is to keep the peace and protect life. And that's something that nobody had to teach me. That's something that a policy can't make you that person if you're not that person.
Right.
That's why we have to try to hire the right people. And I'll just speak for me in this police department and try to find out as much as we can what's here, who you really are, because it comes out.
That it did. But I appreciate your time. I know you got to go. Your schedule is busy. We've been trying to lock you down for almost a week now. So I appreciate you taking the time. And, I don't know if you have a message you just want to let be known for the residents of the Bay Area as far as you're concerned about what's going on, that you just want to express to them before you go and let them know that you're here.
It's really, particularly for the people of San Francisco, it's my thank you. And I say that because this country was founded on what we're seeing right now, or it's improved on what we're seeing right now. And you're talking to a person who is from the Deep South. And you're talking to a person, when I see, people quoting, letters from the Birmingham jail and what happened in Birmingham, Alabama in the mid-'60s. My mom, my grandmother, my in-laws, they were there. If you look at, there was an incident in Birmingham where 4 little girls were killed in a church that was bombed. There was a Time magazine cover of that incident, and my father-in-law is one of the pallbearers. Was one of those little girls was his student. So this means something to me. And I like to thank the people of the city, because protest is the impetus for change. We have a job to do to keep people safe when they do that. And when people come in amidst those protesters and commit crimes and hurt people, it's our job to keep everybody safe. And we were allowed to do that. I think we tried to do that in the best way, in the most just way possible, and we did that. So, to be sitting here, to have this opportunity, and this time of chaos, it's a blessing for me, particularly given where I came from. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate your time and your efforts and your voice being heard and all the meetings that you attend, that we rely on you to be the best person in the room, on a daily basis. And I'm gonna let you get back to your day. You guys want to say anything to Chief Scott over here, Bill, before we let him go?
Just that we appreciate you giving our time and putting your perspective out there, and also trying to keep all your guys in check the best way that you can.
Absolutely.
All right.
100%.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
All right.
I would just, if I may, I would just add.
Oh, Dr. Marshall.
Go ahead, Doc.
You can see. I mean, I wear a lot. First of all, it's good to see all of you. Glad you're all healthy and safe.
Yeah, you as well.
And I wear many hats, doing a radio show, running a live and free Omega Boys Club, but spending 14 years on a police commission. Maybe the best thing we did is to advance this man's name to the mayor to be hired. And you can just see You just listen to them. We got great leadership in this city. There's 18,000 police departments in the country that have to be reformed. And they probably all wish they had Bill Scott leading them, because this is a tough job. I think one of the things that you saw when Mayor Breed released her statements Thursday, she tweaked what we were doing. She didn't have to make a lot of sweeping changes, because we have been, trending under his leadership that way anyway. We put a lot of things in place. I think going forward, particularly in this city, you got the best man leading you, and it's a tough job. I love my job. I would take your job too.
Yeah, you can have that job.
But you're the guy to do it. So just thank you for your, just being who you are, because
Absolutely.
you're right. It's the character of the person that makes these things happen in these tough times. And bold leadership is exactly what you give us. So thank you very much. And thank all of you and the station for really involving yourselves in this. I'm not surprised, because I know your character also. And keep our eyes on the prize, and the struggle continues.
Absolutely.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you all. I appreciate
all.
it. Have a blessed
All right.
weekend.